Welcome to today's Ascendo Reliability webinar. This is Fred Schenkelberg. And I know I've talked about metrics before and reliability and availability and a variety of other KPIs of one sort or another. But I haven't really talked about one of the things I have found in my career in talking to very many organizations and seen some really great ways to monitor and track those measures that we're making, but also some really bad ones. So as is my usual modus operandi, I'll talk about the good, the really bad, the okay or poor, and some really good examples. Plus, some of the hints and tips of how you can make the best use of the metrics and the measurements that you're making, tracking your reliability of your system, of your process, or of your products. And as always, the chat window is open, and that's my major or primary thing I keep track of to see if you have any questions or comments on the material as we go. So we'll go with this. So metric is something we measure in order to learn something about whatever it is that we're interested in. So if we want to know how fast we're going, the speedometer has kind of become our standard tool to make that measurement. And in this case, kilometers per hour is our metric. It's what we're doing at the moment. And we can regulate, make decisions based on that to increase or decrease our speed as conditions and our preferences dictate. Now, that one gives us a pretty good response. We get an indicator and we can respond to it in pretty close to real time, but not always, but close enough in many cases. It's quite different than measuring field reliability. In some cases, we get pretty good measurements and pretty accurate, timely ones. And other ones take us months and months to figure out what the reliability use was at some point in time. Metrics have a broad range of names in particular, and we'll talk about some of those, but also a wide range of tools that are used to make those measurements. And I'm not going to talk about measurement error. I think there's a separate podcast or webinar on that, probably a bunch of articles too. Now, let's say we have a good measure and we're tracking, say, the number of failures that occur in the field per week, and they're coming into us. And what I've seen many organizations do is say, well, we're at X percent number of failures this week. Is that going to go up or go down? And so we say, well, let's just make a simple plot. We'll list the number of failures this week, and then next week we'll list the number of failures that arrived and the number of failures and so on. And we get what may be an indication of a trend. Either the activity we're doing to reduce failure rates is working or it's not, or the design is changing or something else. And we'll talk a lot more about that, what trends can tell us. And that's really what I mean by monitoring, is that we can make a measurement, but one of them all by itself is rarely sufficient, especially when we have an ongoing process or we have an ongoing set of shipments of our products and so on. And so we often look for trends to give us indications of what's happening now and what may be happening in the near future. And so this is another way to extract as much information out of the things that we measure. And in reliability world, it's a common technique. There's nothing really too terrible about it. Now, many of you, especially the ones that have been with the webinars a handful of times, know that I really tend to focus on decisions. The measures and the metrics is great activity. It's fun to do. We can make really cool charts. We do all kinds of cool stuff with that. But unless it's connected to informing somebody as they attempt to make a decision, it's really just an exercise, an academic exercise of monitoring and tracking measurements. If it's connected to a decision and adequately informs that decision maker, so the likelihood of them making the right decision more often, then it's a value. Then it makes a difference. Then it's useful. Simply tracking something because it's entertaining might be a whole lot of fun and bring you personal joy, yet it's not really helping the organization or your customers or the process that you're monitoring or checking. So I'm going to come back to decisions in a couple of different ways, but it really makes a difference if your monitoring process actually has people using it, not just admiring it, as Chris Jackson would say, but using it to inform their decision making in a meaningful way. So here's my first chance to exercise the chat window. So what metric or metrics do you use? And mostly for reliability, what do you measure? And I know I've asked over 200 different organizations these questions, and the answers astound me at their variety. Kelly, you must be in the aircraft industry of some sort, aerospace of some sort. Yep, thought so. I would say my first response to those, and you'll see why in a few minutes, is stop doing that. But it's so ingrained, and I get it, but there are better ways. Anybody else? What else do you use to monitor or to measure reliability? And I'm thinking of once it's in the field or even during development. Oftentimes we're measuring reliability as we go, but what do? Okay, returns deployed versus returns over shipped. Okay, I've seen those a good number of times. There's some good ways to do that and some not so good ways to do that. We'll talk about that. Thanks, Bert. All right. Well, I've seen a couple of examples I am going to talk about in indirect. Haven't seen a good one yet. Failures per flight hour. Yeah, what's going on there, Marcelo, with all the airplane crashes in the last month? Is that just in the news for some odd reason, or I still think air traffic or air flying is the safest way to travel, but it hasn't got a lot of news lately. Count the issues. Okay. Frequency of single point failures. Good. Right. And what you can see in the responses is that we deal with a wide range of products, some high availability things, some that are really important with safety. Some that are, it might be in a factory or a plant. You're looking at availability. Nobody seemed to mention that one. Looks like we got a good number of people in the aerospace industry today. I do have a really good example of the aerospace ones. Quarter availability for subway. Oh, I have never heard of that one, Nasri. I understand it. I worked with a mass transit agency, a local travel or light rail, I think is what they called themselves. And I get that. I understand that. I was working at a different part than the rail cars and arrivals and stuff like that. But have heard of that one. All right, good. But you get an idea that across our different industries and across our different applications, we do track something related to reliability in one form or another. Oftentimes failures, marketing people don't like that. Reliability is kind of a different term for nearly the same thing, has a little more detail to it. Availability when it counts, all kinds of other metrics that we can use. Good. So let's talk about some metrics. And for those that set up MTBF and MTBUR, realize that they're the inverse of an average failure rate. And it's, for anybody that's been at one of these webinars before or knows about my writing, I term it the worst four-letter acronym in our industry, in our business. It's not, and I'm counting on that the people here, the reliability folks, understand what MTBF and its variations are, what it really is. It's, over some duration, often not defined, let's say for a week or for 2 months or a year, then we count the total amount of time our system or systems were active or working or supposed to be working, and divide it by the number of failures, or however we define failures. And for those that are doing MTBUR and MTBF, there have been countless numbers of hours of what counts and what doesn't count, and over what duration, and how standardized or not standardized it is. And then you get a agree on a measure and a metric, and you put the number up there, and the decision makers look at it and go, oh, well, it's not going to fail for 50,000 hours. What do we have to do anything for? And they think it's a failure free period, or they think it's a, one failure per 50,000 hours. And there's like a mini normal curve at whatever the MTBF number is, and so on and so on and so on. I have run into highly educated, very smart, intelligent people that just can't wrap their head around what it means and how to interpret it and how to use it. And then the other people that I think really know what they're doing use it and go, oh, we're always in the flat part of the bathtub curve, and it's always this failure rate for the first hour of its operation to its 200,000th hour of operation. And the folks here obviously know that, well, that's not really true. Now, if we average it all out, it reflects that average just fine. Yet there's an infinite number of permutations of arrivals of failures that will give you the exact same number. So as a metric, and the misunderstanding, the general misunderstanding of what it is, and its general misuse and its general misinterpretation, I highly recommend that you stop using it to make any decisions of any kind. And I could talk, as some folks know, I could easily talk about this for a whole hour and hopefully convince you and arm you with plenty of information about how to avoid using this and teach others better ways. But let me leave it at that. I'll get off my soapbox here real quick. Now, we'll talk about a couple different ways to metrics for reliability, and hopefully a couple of those will give you ideas that may just work in your measurement, in your system. I even put MTBF and its variations as worse than no measurement at all. We might have a gut feel of looking at return rate or returning products and not tracking it, not measuring it at all, will give us a better bit of information than an MTBF calculation on top of it. That's not my opinion. It actually gives us, I have lots and lots of evidence of people that really don't understand the MT stuff. Well, let me move on. One of the I saw, and I noticed one in the chat was doing this a little bit. Let's see. I got a couple of comments coming in. Hey, Carl, welcome back. Alan saying, which component of MTBF is most problematic? Measurement of time or measurement of failures? You know, Rob, the time is whatever time you want. You can define it however you want. I can measure the number of failures this minute, this hour, this week, whatever. And I end up with just a number that says our MTBF is X. Now, if I run longer and there's no failures, my MTBF improves. If I run longer and there's lots of failures, then my MTBF gets worse. It gets lower. Yet it's variable by what time frame I'm using. So if I'm comparing say a production facility for 1 week versus a 1 month run, is that really apples to apples? And that kind of relates to the second one on the screen. Same with time. A lot of people believe, actually make decisions based on that the MTBF value at the end of the day is a duration of failure-free period or minimal failures over that period of time. It's not a duration. I just wrote an article on Ascendo, or posted an article on Ascendo, is MTBF is not a duration. It's an inverse failure rate. And so just by its very nature, it lends itself to misunderstanding. So But I ran into one organization. They were making these small widgets, and they made a lot of them. And what they were tracking kind of shocked me because this was a pretty bright group, a pretty smart group, and it was a medical device of some sort. But they were measuring, say, like in April, they would measure how many units they shipped. So in April, they shipped, say, 100 units, and it was closer like 100,000. So they shipped some units. And then in April, the same exact month, they would get returns. And so they counted how many returns they got in April. So they would divide the number of returns they got in April, the same month as the number of shipments, they divided it by. And so I said, do you typically get returns like immediately if something's wrong? Do your customers, assess the product or put it in a production facility or do something? Are they used upon arrival and then they immediately turn around and tell you this? And they go, oh, no, it takes a month or 2 months or sometimes a year before the shipment is actually used. Okay. So what happens if your production rate goes up or your production rate goes down? Oh, it's horrible. Our failure rate, really shows that. And I says, has the failure rate changed? Is the number of failures per units available to fail change, or is it just your shipments change? And they went, oh, okay. And they would whipsaw all kinds of activities, do all kinds of really cool stuff, and have no effect because they're just chasing phantoms. And it was one of these things where, yeah, you want to, they're saying the old units, we don't know when they get used, or if they don't fail, we don't know exactly how they're used or how long before they're used or whatever. So we're only going to count what we ship today. And I was like, this is very interesting. Is there a serial number on this? Oh, yeah, it's a serial number. How about you use that serial number to figure out what week of production they came from? Oh, yeah, we could do that. And I'm like, you would have a whole lot better idea of how many failures came from that week's production, would be a whole lot more meaningful than comparing it to units that haven't even been put in the market yet. They're still in shipment. And it took them a while to sort this out and understand the math involved with dividing apples by oranges or vice versa. So that was one of the worst examples I saw. That they were actually measuring something and doing calculations and so on, but they kind of got the basic premise of what are you comparing in this fraction such that it will make any difference whatsoever. The other one I ran into is they were tracking warranty expenses, and regulars at this webinar have heard this story a handful of times, but these guys shipped it was a medical device, and for every unit they sold, I should say, every unit they sold, they shipped 2 extra over the next year and a half, 2 years, because they had a 2-year warranty. And if the product failed, it would they would get a new unit. And it had about a 50% failure rate per year. So it was very likely that 1 or 2 units would fail over the 2-year warranty period. And the director of quality was very concerned about this, that it was impacting production. It was impacting their ability warehousing area. They couldn't hire enough people to keep up production. And the senior management thought that that was a good sign of product growth, that they were doing great. And so I went and talked to their chief financial officer and said, what do you measure for warranty? And they said, only the spare parts. So if it was a loose screw, they'd screw it back in and they would charge warranty in their books for that 2-cent screw. If it was replacing a compressor, they would count just the cost of that $20 compressor. So their overall warranty expense on their books was insignificant. It wasn't even worth mentioning. Yet they had a 50% year-over-year failure rate. Every year, half of their products failed. And they couldn't see it because the only thing they tracked related to reliability At the senior level side was the warranty expenses, and that was artificially exceedingly small because of what they chose to count. They didn't count the cost of creating a new unit that was essentially given to the customer for free, all of the diagnostics and the shipping back, the retraining, the lost customers. There's a bunch of stuff they weren't counting. Many things that we would commonly count, but they didn't. Let's see, I got a couple of questions here. Why is MTTF an important metric? Mean time to failure. It's not, Carl. It's commonly used, which is misconstrued as being important. It's not important. It is exceedingly easy to use and orders of magnitude easier to misunderstand and misuse. Plus, it gives you precious little information about what's going on with your product or system. Remember, it's a point estimate of an average failure rate, inverted. It's really not useful in any, what are the limitations of it? It's just an average. It gives you no indication of the spread of your failures. So if I was assuming it was a normal distribution, I have an average, but I don't have the variance. If I'm assuming it's a Weibull distribution, I can calculate from mean time to failure, mean time or MTBF. I can calculate or estimate a scale or what's I always get scale and I'm drawing a blank, shape parameter. I need two variables in order to convert this to the mean. I need more data just to understand, is this the increasing failure rate or decreasing failure rate, or hazard rate, I should say. We just don't have enough information with MTTF or MTBF. From a statistics point of view, we take a perfectly good time to failure set of data and convert it to an incredibly easy to do average, which strips out a significant part of the information that we really need to know. So I really don't want to talk about MTBF a bunch, but I will. I love talking about it. Yeah, Rob, the mean part also, I get people that think that MTBF is it's a normal distribution, that it's the mu of a normal distribution. And they don't seem to be too concerned that they don't know the variance side of it, which is concerning. But anyway, these are bad examples. If any of these are the way you measure reliability and go about monitoring it, please stop. Please think through this a little bit better. Please find something that is actually useful for you. Some poor examples. Just doing the failure rate per week or per month. It's about like doing MTBF or MTTF, except you're calling it a failure rate, which is fine. You can call it a failure rate. And then they just measure it per week, per month, whatever. And you can monitor that, put it on a chart and so on. But once again, it loses the amount of, you get a little bit more information about the variability that's involved with your system or process, but it's prone to a lot of misuse as to, mostly in some of our products fail, say in the first month. Some of our products wait a year to fail. So how are you keeping track of this overall? Is a spike in our failure rate on a per week or per month basis an increase? Let's say it goes up for 2 or 3 weeks in a row. Is that due to a new early life failure due to a production change? Or is that signaling a wear out mechanism that's coming on at the end of the product's life? Because once we do this failure rate, it's an average, we lose some of that information about, well, how old is this product when it fails? And so it's better than nothing, but it's hard to interpret unless you do a whole lot of work to understand, and the failure analysis and all the other stuff to figure out what's really going on. Failures in time. Some products have very low failure rates, expectedly. And so we use this, divide by a million or a billion, depending on what language you're using of English, which version of English you're using. And you get like 9 fit, which is a really small failure rate. What's missing, though, is over what duration. right? It's not failures per billion hours because we haven't had a product work for a billion hours yet. So how in the world did we get there? Where's this information come from? Lots of games are played around fit and failure rate, and so they're while better than others, they're still missing a lot of information that we really need to get after it. Rolling averages is a great one if you want to really mask the variability of what's going on in your product. And so if you have a really bad early life failures, let's say when you launch a new product, there's a learning curve, and you know that you're going to have this learning curve, and you tweak in your production and you get the design cleaned up and so on. One of the great ways to mask that is do a rolling average, and so that it smooths out the curve, and it pretends that a lot of those anomalies, the good weeks and the bad weeks, just don't happen. And I've seen them where they would change the rolling average to longer and longer periods, the more problems they were seeing, more spikes they were seeing. So because they really didn't like looking at busy failure rate data. So they smoothed it out. So they had a nice clean line, effectively erasing all of the information that would signal management team or your reliability team to go take a look. What's going on with the failures in this week? Where are they coming from? But if we smooth it all out, if you smooth it out long enough, it's pretty much useless. All right. So enough with the poor example. Here's a couple of great examples. And I do have one of them that, before I forget, is aerospace industry. I ran into this group, it's close to 20 years ago now. One of the nuances, and I don't know if it's still required or not, is that aircraft need to keep a log of unexpected removals, hence the MTBUR, mean time between unscheduled renewal or replacement or removal. I always forget what all those letters stand for. But it's basically if the, let's say a navigation system or a communication box fails or is upgraded, you need to record it and keep track of, you took out this serial number box of this vendor and you put in this box, a new box, and you indicate whether it was a failure or whether it was just an upgrade or whatever. And they get counted slightly differently. Well, this one aircraft industry company that I was working with is they shipped a laptop at the time, I don't know what they do now, with the aircraft that had all of the maintenance records and all the reporting things that needed to be done. And they offered, we'll back this up. Just upload it to us. You'll always have it available. If you lose the laptop, there's a backup record for you. And it was a convenience for the maintenance and maintainability and the reporting that they did on the aircraft. But what they also got was nearly real time, is how many communication boxes from vendor A got replaced in the upper Midwest, and how many navigation systems got replaced for failures, say, in the Southeast, on which kind of aircraft, and how many flight hours did that aircraft have per week or per month or whatever. They got a trove of amazingly good data. Now, they didn't use MTBUR except where it was required by the FAA for whatever reason they do it. They used that as time to failure data and shared it with their vendors, but they were also internally able to pull up a Weibull plot or appropriate time to failure plots to compare different vendors, to compare different types of aircraft, to compare the same aircraft in different regions of the world and so on. They had an amazing database that they could separate, and eventually they were able to kit out a new aircraft given what they know about how it's going to be used, so that it had the highest availability possible and least number of unscheduled removals. And it really helped them and their brand create an aircraft that people just wanted. But they used the fluke in federal regulations saying you got to report this stuff, and made it easy for their customers to do so, and use that data to improve what boxes they were putting on the airframe. and what kind of devices and systems they were purchasing. It was amazing. And so the idea of in an industry, using MTBUR as just the standard measure is they said, no, we don't use that because it's not meaningful. It doesn't help us at all. It doesn't tell us if its rates increasing or decreasing. And plotting MTBUR week to week is misleading also for all kinds of reasons. But the idea is that they had this great data and used it so effectively to make decisions in their organization. What I highly recommend is just use reliability. The probability of success over a defined duration for a product that's in a set of functions and a set of environments that's all relatively well known as best as we can. But just this probability of success over a duration is so much easier to understand than an inverted average failure rate. Even managers can understand it. It's amazing to me. The other step up from that is to use the Weibull plot or the CDF, the cumulative distribution plot. I have found that within 20 seconds of explaining what a CDF is, management teams go, oh, so we have this above what we expect failure rate early on, or we have a lower failure rate than we have early on. But look at this, it really kind of tails off here. And we could make a 10-year warranty out of this thing. We can afford that. Or they can make all kinds of inferences and understanding of a CDF with 20 seconds of what it is, understanding what it is. Availability, when it's measured real time, not using MTBF and not using MTTR, but measuring it's supposed to have a 100-hour shift and it was available and on and running for 99 hours. So then do the math and that's your availability. I much prefer that than any other one. The idea though is that we have available to us, no pun intended, really good measures of reliability. One of them happens to be called reliability. So let's use that. It's not hard to understand. Now, I've seen organizations that will take a look at, and they're shipping high volumes. And it doesn't really work for shipping one aircraft every week kind of thing, but it still apply. And they were tracking the reliability per week of manufacture. And you'll see it on products. I'm sure many of you have noticed it. If it's not on your product, you've seen it in others, is a little 4-digit code that basically says what week of was it manufactured or what week was it shipped. There's some indication of how old this thing is. And sometimes it's embedded in serial numbers. Sometimes it's a separate thing. But the idea is that if you get the product back, you can very quickly say, oh, this was from last year's in April. And let's take a look. We only shipped 100 units that week. And I can do a Weibull plot just for that April, or a CDF just for that 1 week in April or for that month of April. And because I know how many were produced, I know how many came back. And so I can censor the rest of them. And I know how old they are because I know when they went, well, roughly, we know when they got shipped. And we can say, is this one in track with our goals or is this one above or below our goals? And then we can work backwards to figure out what's going on with that. The next step up was a heat map I've seen a couple of organizations use. And this is where they had, it's not just a fixed failure rate. Like they say, oh, it has to be at, 20 fit every week. That's our max failure rate. And every week of production, we track how many failures come back from that week of production. And so that week of production might be 1 week old, 2 weeks old, 3 weeks old, so on. And it sort of looks like a Nevada plot, except each square is actually reflecting the comparison between what was the expected failure rate for that week of age of that product versus what it actually is showing up to be. And then they would make it, I call it management friendly by using red, yellow, green, or different shadings of colors to show how far off of above the expected value they actually were. And so what you end up with is a Nevada plot that has red, yellow, green on it. If it's hitting target or exceeding it, it was green. If it was close to or above the target by a small amount, and you define what that is, it would be yellow. And if it was above it, say by 10% or 20% above your expected value, it'd be red. And so as a product shipped by week, and you're making changes to production, your supply chain changing, everything else, you can, in close to real time, get a picture of how your product is doing from each week of production. And it gives you a pretty good clue of, did changes make a difference or not? So let's say the first 3 weeks of production and you had a high infant mortality or early life failures. And those are all red, the first 3-4 months of that product's life in the field. And then it tapered off and the early life issues faded away, and the rest of the product was behaving fine, but the remaining products were doing fine. So we made some changes to the production, and in the next 3 weeks of production, they're showing green in that early life failure section. And it's a very good visual to make those comparisons really easy without doing a whole lot of machinations and lots of squiggly lines and everything else. It can contain a lot of information on one piece of paper. And it actually is a pretty effective way to do it. And the trick is to get the expected right. So if you're launching a product and you did all the work during development and saying, oh, we should be at X reliability over the first 3 months, and here's the distribution we expect, and at 5 years it should have this reliability is our target, and here's our curve of expected reliability that's smooth from time 0 to time 200 years or whatever life expectancy you have. Then for each week, calculate what's the expected reliability for a product that's 3 weeks old or 6 weeks old or 8 weeks old, and use that as the baseline in the heat map. Then as actuals come in, instead of a Nevada plot that's useful for people that like gazing at large tables of numbers or input into some other system to create Weibull plots or other CDFs, you can immediately do the comparison and assign a color to it. And it's actually pretty effective. But the bottom line for the metrics and monitoring of metrics that I think really, really work is doing comparisons. Well, what should it be doing? What are we expecting it to do? And what's your evidence for why you believe it should be doing that? And then what is your actual? What is the stuff that you're actually seeing? Now, I did see one comment in there is not everybody reports failures. That is true. It is very, very true. Some of it is why bother? You have such a complex call center and websites non-existent to help me sort this problem out. It's some companies make it obvious they really don't want to hear about anything failing. And here's a customer that cares enough about that product that they actually want to get it working again. If you make it difficult enough, they're going to just throw it away and go buy your competitors. Remember that customers complain not out of the joy of their hearts. They're doing it because they actually want that product to work and they expect it to work. And so they're taking time to actually give you a lot of great information. If you can embody that and get the value out of that and make it an experience that customers do want to tell you about what's going on, yes, you may have an increase in reported failures, yet the long-term part of that is now you actually have a better picture of what's really going on. If only 10% of your customers complain or let you know about it versus go to your competitors, having a 20% of your customers complain but stay with your product is actually a business case for that. It makes a whole lot more business sense than to alienate your customers. So be careful about how your system is set up to encourage or discourage your customers from actually telling you what's going on. Now, there's all kinds of other ways to gather field data. You can do it automatically. You can do it on a teardown on products that you're leasing to a customer, all kinds of ways to do it. The end of the day is what we're measuring needs to be a comparison. What is it we want it to do or expect it to do? And then as close to real time as we can get, how is it doing compared to that? Just tracking it without it having any comparison leaves it to gut sense, or that looks weird, or is that a real issue? Is that worth following? And then great discussions that you can admire the measure. You don't actually make any decisions. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Yeah, and Bert, you certainly could do by month, by year. It really depends on your product. The one I saw doing it by week was they were making like 1 million units a month kind of thing. So they had plenty of units going out there. You could do a by hour or by week or by day if it made sense for the cost of gathering the data and that refined method versus what you're going to do with the data. So let's talk a little bit more about that. Let's see. What if, all right, here's one thing that really be careful about is what can affect a trend. And this is one of the things why I don't really like point estimates or averages, is that it tends to mask or obscure the ability to detect trends. Right? If you design a really poor control chart, your process will always be in control. If you design a overly sensitive control chart, you'll be chasing ghosts a good too many times. So part of the process of setting a good metric monitoring system is understanding that everything changes. The product we make today is not going to be the same as the product that goes through our production line next month. Something will have changed. The temperature in your room may change. The vendors that you're buying the raw materials from will change. Their processes change. The way customers actually use the product will change. So and how often they use it and so on. The idea of the trends, it really starts with, well, what are we looking for, right? Are we looking for issues with just what's changing in our environment? Or are we looking for not the actual failure rate, but just well, let me use an example. If you're measuring a point estimate, right, and it's the average failure rate, let's call it what it is. And as I start ramping up our product, the first month I ship 100 units, the second month I ship 1,000 units, the third month I ship 10,000 units. And in the fourth month, I look at my failure rates, and it looks great. The oldest units I have are 3 months old, and I may have a couple of failures from those, right? But the last 3 months, I've orders of magnitude put many orders of, 2 orders of magnitude brand new products out there. And so even if there is a failure that's occurring at month 3, the chance of me actually recognizing that goes to 0, or it looks like our product is just getting better and better and better as I continue to flood the market with brand new products that haven't even been unboxed yet. The idea is that as we ramp up or ramp down our production, we get these artifacts that show up in our measurement systems unless we're aware of it, right? If we're just taking the last 3 months of data and saying how many failures we got, well, realize that vast majority of those units are very young. And so the idea of them even having an opportunity to fail yet is very low. So artificially, independent of what the actual failure rate is of our unit, it will look great. Everything's golden. We have a beautiful launch. Everything's absolutely hunky-dory. And just the opposite happens if we're, say, seasonally, we're ramping down. So let's say we did our big back to school sales, and now we have to ramp down, and then we'll ramp back up for Christmas and the holidays. But the ramping down makes everything look much worse, depending on the measurement system you're using, is because now I have a predominance of older units in the mix versus the newer units. I don't have an even mix. So if I'm just lumping all those weeks together and months together, then just changes in production will whipsaw our measures. And eventually we'll just stop paying attention to them because they're just not meaningful. And there's all kinds of other things that change the frequency of failures occurring. Right? It could be all environmental use. Let me say, I think seasonality. It could be patterns in our sales and marketing processes. We have, say, like the holiday season or back to school season for some products. And then we have, right after tax refunds in the United States, there seems to be a surge of purchasing of certain items. Depending on your business, there may be a seasonality to this thing, but it also affects the use in the environmental things. You know that not many snow shovels fail in the summer. It's amazing how that happens. I don't know why, but it looks like our product is absolutely wonderful through the summer months. And lo and behold, when they're, chipping 3 inches of ice off of their driveway, the handle breaks. I grew up using an actual snow shovel. I don't know if anybody uses those anymore, but I don't live where it snows. So there. And then there's actual changes, the things that we're probably really interested in measuring reliability over time is, did our design or process change in some way? And it got through our qualifications and got through our checks and balances and our processes. And the last call is what's happening in the field. Those are the things we can do something about. Changes in the weather, we better get the design right, right? There's some information that occurs to us there. But the idea is that be careful about what your measurement system and your monitoring process actually measures. And a great way to do this is say, all right, what's our production forecast? How are we going to produce these things, and how do we expect it to change, say, over the next year? And there's probably a forecast. It may not be perfect, but it gives you an idea. We're going to do 100, and then 1,000, and then 10,000. Then we're going to do 10,000 for 3 months, and then we're going to ramp down. And depending on market forces at that time, we may ramp down faster or slower. I can put that in a spreadsheet and then say, what if we actually expect our products to fail at, say, a 2% per year process, or whatever measure we're using to do it, whatever your measurement system is? What is your expected part of that? Put that in there. All right, for the first month of production, say, well, how many failures do I get the first month, second month, third month, and so on, and work out, create your own Nevada table, create your own, how you would measure that. And then see if there's artifacts in there that falsely signal things, so that you can be aware that that's not a real signal. And if that process signals or educates you and the team enough to say, well, this process really isn't going to give us the information we're looking for. How can we improve it? That's before you even start making the measurements to start shipping the product, is go through and really understand, where do the artifacts come from? Those false signals come from? And what can you do to mitigate those or adjust for them? I always hear in the financial news is seasonally adjusted. So if you have a seasonal or a cyclic nature to your product, can you account for that and strip out the effects of the seasonality in a meaningful way, so that you can actually see the signals that you're most interested in? All right, so how do you use metric monitoring? Where does this go? Who uses it, and for what reasons? Gives me a chance to take a sip of water here, catch up with some of the comments. Bert's got lots of snow. Hopefully you didn't break too many snow shovels. Carl's looking at MTBF and a handful of articles I got out there. Let some VIP check a box somewhere. Well, that's that good. Yeah, it's one of the reasons we use MTBF. They just feel like it's useful for them at the moment. Reliability of machine. Well, reliability actually works as that. Availability, if it's a repairable system, say like an automobile. But if you're looking at, say, piston in an engine, or stator in a motor, then just reliability. works just great. Bearings, reliability. Um, B10 is just a point estimate at the 10th percentile. Why don't we get the first percentile all the way to the 95th percentile in one cumulative distribution function? Wouldn't that be cool and informative? Report to program management. All right, so what does program management do with this table of numbers showing this, that, and the other? It's take a decision. All right, drive into that a little bit, Marcel. It's, what are they trying to do? Prioritize issues. Yeah, that's a good one. And I imagine, Marcel, you're in that realm too, is that they're marketing for requests for proposal. Oh, that's good. Um, yeah, Carl, I think everything in that comment you just made is wrong, but we'll discuss that in a different time. Reminds me of a Star Wars thing, quote of some sort. Sorry, Carl. All right. We can make lots of measurements. We have all kinds of gadgets and tools for measuring this, that, and the other thing. And we have functionality in our product of usually hundreds and hundreds of different specific functions it's supposed to do, or behave as, or weigh, or survive shipping, or whatever. And we can measure almost all of that stuff pretty easily. It's really mute, though, if we don't ever use that information. And so the real key to a metric monitoring system is that it has to inform decision makers in a way that is they can understand and they can get. They can use it to make the correct decision. At the end of the day, we're going to make decisions whether or not we have metrics or a chart or a table of numbers or anything. We're going to have to say, do we ship this or not? Do we make an improvement or not? Do we invest in a new production facility that has a lower, number of defects coming out of it? We need information in order to inform that decision. So in measuring reliability or availability or any of the other ilities that we get involved with, it needs to be grounded in, well, what decisions are coming up, right? What kinds of information or what kinds of decisions are going to be made? Let's do a high volume product, and we're bringing on a new supplier for a critical part, and we're going to slowly ramp them up into the system. Now, one of the key questions is, does that affect our product's performance? And we can do all kinds of cool stuff in the lab and evaluate and test and qualify and do all these other good things. Yet each of you, and I know I have run into it, is that you do all that stuff and they have a unique property that we didn't test for. And it causes havoc in the field, or it really makes a huge benefit in the field. If we're not measuring it in a way to detect, is this vendor better, adequate, or worse, we're very unlikely to gather information and present it in a way that informs the decision that this was the right choice before we go 10-year contract with them. The other thing is that it's also, we want to monitor changes in our process. That might be a valid reason to do field failure monitoring. And so we want to be able to detect relatively small changes, because a vendor's change of an O-ring's elasticity may affect the ability of our system to retain moisture or to hold liquid in it, and it leaks. Customers call that a failure. Let's make sure that we gather the appropriate information so that we can detect that, right? If we're smoothing it all out and averaging it, or if we don't do failure analysis, then it's really hard to tell. But first step is, what are the likely decisions we're going to use this information for? What are the types of decisions that need to be made that using field data or or monitoring of some metric would inform or help. Start with the decision, then figure out what you're going to measure and then how well you need to measure it. It's not just because we always do it this way. Well, we need to make better decisions. There's always a business case for that. And so, what is the investment in your measurement system such that you can make better decisions rather than just, I want a better gauge so I can make more accurate decisions? That's a non starter. Do we really need a more accurate gauge? If there's a business case behind it because it helps you make better decisions, then you've got something. And so really start with what is the type and range of decisions that this data may be useful for. And I shouldn't phrase it that way. It should be, what are the decisions that are going to be made and what kind of information would be necessary to make the right decision? Start there and then work out to what you're actually measuring and how you're presenting it. So if it's week by week and you're making decisions on if you're on target or you need to adjust your warranty accruals, that's a different story than is our production line running stably. And might be the same type of collection that we do, yet the way we present it and the way we inform decision makers may be very different. Always check for artifacts. Whatever system you're using is, let's say I mentioned it earlier, is what's your expectation? What is the expected range of production? What's your expected month-to-month production? What's your expected month-to-month expected failure rates? And then pretend you're actually measuring it. And does your measurement system reflect the expected results? And this, in a simulation, is your actual performance. If it doesn't reflect that, then the system itself of monitoring your performance has what I call artifacts, or has noise in it. And so really need to identify them so that you can strip out things so you're not artificially eroding the trust in this measurement system. And once that happens and you're chasing a bunch of ghosts and it's not useful for informing decisions, then you might as well just stop, because if nobody's trusting it and they're going to use it, it's little point in spending the time to go measure this stuff. And finally, it's really make sure you have a plan to stop measuring stuff. Monitoring and measuring stuff and doing the analysis on it costs time and money. It's an expense. It is. It's only useful if it's of value. If once you've made all the decisions and you're not going to change the product anymore, you're not going to change the production facility anymore. That report now is just a piece of paper, and not even that anymore. It's probably a bunch of pixels, but it still took time and energy to gather and put together. Is it really necessary? Is there a business case for continuing? And plan for that. What are the signals or triggers that say, no, we're done. Stop measuring this, stop reporting it. If you wait to 6 months after the product has stopped production and it's been obsolete and no longer supported, and you're still looking for data to measure it, you're really wasting your time, to be frank. The idea is, and this comes from experience, I've seen things that have been measured for decades after it was not useful anymore. And nobody told the tech to stop measuring it. It's a colossal waste of time. So take a look at your measurement system from start to finish, and it starts with the design and it ends with what are the signals to stop doing this? And in each of those parts of it is, where is the most value? What are we trying to do with this stuff? What decisions are being made? What informs them? And then when is it no longer of value to invest in collecting and analyzing it, when there's no more decisions to be made, or the decisions are mute? We're not going to change anything, or we're not going to do anything about it. There's no changes as a result of what's happening in the field. Then it doesn't matter. Stop it. It's easy to set up a bureaucracy where you have a whole team doing all this analysis all the time. But if it's just a doorstop, or and I saw that in a program where they had all these beautiful reports, And the senior manager that I was talking to says, "Oh, I get those every week. I stack them up over there." And he used it as a doorstop. Literally used these reports of field reliability as a doorstop. Never looked at it because, oh, I don't believe any of that stuff. I talk to customers all the time, and they don't know what they're doing. Have you ever talked to them about what they're doing and what would be useful for you? Oh, I don't have time for that. I don't. I really hope he's not that job anymore. But the idea is that when we measure something, it should be used for something. If it's not, we're probably have a problem. Yeah, well, there's all kinds of reasons people ignore failures, and it's very true. Bert, if it's getting the understanding of customer view of the product, you keep reporting it. Make sure that it includes the marketing team. How does that information of use to them or to use to whoever needs that customer view? What is it exactly we're looking for? Is it changes in use profile? Maybe they're using. I know there's a bunch of aerospace type people online, or aircraft folks. It sounded like. Um, is the pattern of use of their private jets changing? Is the changes in our aircraft? I saw a picture yesterday of a Canadian. Um, I want to say TSA, but it's like going through customs, and on the heading to the U.S. Was completely empty, and I'm not sure if it was a made up one where they took a picture of it at midnight or something like that, but that would signal a change in the frequency of flights or flight patterns or flight behaviors or even just loads on aircraft. If that's important for you and your organization's decision making, then are you measuring that kind of stuff? It's a part of that. Let's see, got a couple other comments here. How granular do you get? That's a good question. Now, remember that if you have a system, say a car, right, and you go down to the individual capacitor on say a dashboard display system, that may be over analyzing it. It may be incredibly useful information, and you need to find and justify that. But if it's a vendor component and you're going to replace the whole unit, say some organizations call a field replaceable unit, if you're going to replace the whole dashboard or the whole circuit board, maybe that's the only level of data that we're going to actually get. And yeah, we could get some of those boards back and do the root cause on that circuit board. Now, if I'm making that module, that vendor may be very interested in that level of detail. If there's a benefit for your organization and your supplier in this made up scenario here, then to the component level may be incredibly valuable. But at each step of the process, there's, what's failing or how the count of failures, but then it's equally important is then, well, what's the failure analysis? What do we know about that particular failure? And that's a whole nother webinar of connecting those two type things. I didn't get into a whole lot of the big hand wave at the start saying, assuming that your measurement system is adequate, right? It actually is giving you meaningful information. If you need to know that capacitor number 107 on circuit board 2B is significant, then measure it to that level. If it's not, don't. If you're, say, you got a spike of these circuit boards failing, then get some of them and do the more detailed failure analysis. It doesn't mean that your measuring and monitoring and metric system is fixed. Doesn't mean you can't ramp it up to more detailed or go to more detailed view of things. It allows you the flexibility to do that. So what kind of screen is useful for you and your organization to make those decisions? Marcel, it's a good question. How do you replace MTBUR rolling monitoring with probabilities? Just do it. Provide both sets of information and say, take a look. Here's the MTBUR number this month, last month, 2 months ago, and here's the chart. And here's a cumulative distribution function of this, whatever it is you're monitoring or measuring, or a mean cumulative plot, which is even simpler. It's a non-parametric method of using monitoring field failures. That gives you more of a continuous view of what's going on. So give them both and explain this is much richer information. And if you've got some trusted senior folks, say a mentor or somebody that you can go to and say, hey, look, using MTBUR, you made this and this decision. And it turned out 3 months later, it wasn't right. If you would have used this same information presented in this way, not an MTBR, but a cumulative distribution function or some other way of presenting the reliability or availability of your system, would you have made a different decision? Now that you got to have some trusted people on your side to champion that thing and taking the time to understand it. Somebody that really wants to improve their ability of their organization to make better decisions. Find somebody like that, show them both options, and 9 times out of 10, it really, really works. Anytime I've been required to send somebody an MTBF, I send them a Weibull plot along with it. And I show the MTBF on the Weibull plot. And they ask, what's the rest of this stuff for? 20 seconds, they go, oh, send me that in the future. It's way more informative. Let's see, slightly philosophical, but do you have a general process of deciding what specific sets of metrics a company should start tracking? What to measure from scratch? What's important to your customer? Right? What's important to your customer, because they are the final arbiter of what's a failure, right? If it's the wrong color, if it's the button's in the wrong place, if it doesn't function, if I bought it and I expect it to last for 5 years and you're only measuring the first year, you may be missing what's important to the customer. And second is what's important to your business, right? Warranty period is not the end of the road. If brand loyalty is important to you, it goes well beyond warranty periods most of the time. So think through what's important to the business. Is it market growth, which needs brand loyalty to get the resales at a lower price, but also word of mouth that this product is really good? Reliability is often a significant factor in why people choose to purchase something again. And it's a trusted brand, those kinds of things. On the other hand, if you're not monitoring or measuring that, it's really hard to know if your reliability is a factor in that decision or not. So part of it is talk to the marketing people, talk to the senior management. What's important? What is the long-term vision or goal for this product line or for this organization? Start with those. And then start with then what are the decisions you need to make related to reliability or quality or whatever part of the field you're working in. And then propose decisions or metrics that would help them inform their decision making. So part of it from scratch is customers, your business, and then decisions. Start with the big picture, and then you can work your way out of that. Yep, I agree, Carl. Failure analysis is crucial. We didn't really go into that today. That's part of it. Good luck, Marcel, and getting the replacement going. I think if you show them the differences and how it affects decision making, it makes a huge difference. Granular question I got. Yeah, return on investment. Rob, you're exactly right. I think that's the advanced class. Let's see, I think I got a couple of new messages. Very welcome, Besu. Welcome, Michael. And I know we're a few minutes over, so, and my cat is hungry. She's at my desk. So enjoy the rest of the day. Take a close look at what you're measuring and how it's used. And hopefully it helps you get some more value out of the decisions that are made based on that information. I think that's the real summary of this one. Thanks all for attending. Thanks, Bert. And I'll be on again next month, and I don't know what I'm talking about. I have it scheduled someplace. And Chris is up in 2 weeks, another one of his dazzling webinars that are absolutely enjoyable and informative. Different style than mine, that's for sure, but always fun. And we'll keep you posted. In the meantime, if you have any questions or topics you'd like to talk about, and welcome to all the folks that were first time joining this week or this month. Just let us know. Send over a note or a message, or give us a shout on LinkedIn. We'd be happy to entertain all kinds of topics. What's important to you is important to us. That sounds kind of cheesy, doesn't it? But anyway, guys, all have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to you again soon. Take care.